It's Peace Clip. It really was a good week. It was fun. And I'm tired, but I'm so glad to be here with you. Our gospel story today, the story of feeding the 5,000, goes right into the story of Jesus walking on the water. And in fact, that happens in 3 of the 4 gospels when they tell the story of feeding the 5,000. It goes right into that walking on water story. And it's one of those that you're like, I wonder why. I don't know exactly why those are back to back. And I have a distinct memory of a time when I heard a sermon on this story. I was going to visit a church for the first time with one of my college girlfriends, and the pastor preached on this text, and he said that it was a miracle that Jesus fed the 5,000. Afterward, they gathered up these 12 large baskets of the leftover food, and then they got on the boat, and then when they saw Jesus walk on the water, they were afraid. And he said it was basically a shame on them. He said, shame on these disciples for having such little faith. Such little faith because every single one of them had in front of them in that boat a giant basket full of food that should have been their sign to know, to trust, and to not be afraid. I thought that was a little bit weird. And I guess I might not have had as much tact as I wish I did as a college kid, but afterwards I met up with him in the narthex, and I was introduced, and I said, hey, I got a question for you. How did you know that the disciples took the big baskets of food with them in the boat? Because it doesn't say that anywhere. And he kind of looked at me like, what's this kid doing? And I said, well, like, weren't fishing boats pretty small? Like, do you think that 12 grown men plus the 13th and Jesus, and then also 12 huge baskets of fish or food would also fit on this small fishing boat? Would they all fit? And he was like, getting skeptical of me. And then I said, well, do you think in the desert that like a single grown man could eat an entire basket, a massive basket full of fish in the desert before it went bad? And he started to get a little mad, I could tell. And then I said, I just always thought, why wouldn't they leave the food with the poor people that they had just finished preaching to? And he was not happy with these questions. In fact, he jumped into one of my least favorite things, which was, I've read every commentary, every scholar in the history of the world, and they all say I'm right. I interpreted the story right, so you can just trust me. I did it right. I was like, okay, dude. Whatever you need to tell yourself today, that's fine. I don't think I went back. I don't know why that bothered me so much. Like, honestly, if you think about it, his point probably could have stood without the baskets of fish in the boat, right? Like his point, you just saw Jesus do a miracle, so you have evidence that he can do miracles, so don't be afraid. You should be able to trust in that. He could have just said, oh, yeah, you're right. The fish didn't really matter. But he just had to double down. He had to be right. And I guess that just really bothered me because it speaks to a certain type of faith that I bump into all the time. And it's this idea that like faith means confirming what I think, confirming what I already believe to be true, or in the instance that doesn't happen, waiting until it does happen and ignoring everything else. Right? Like that is faith, to stick to your guns, to stay true to what you think to a fault and to the very end. And I don't know, sometimes I see this in a lot of faith communities where this can happen individually, but it can also happen in like groups of people, where groups of people find themselves getting together with people who think the exact same way that they do, and they spend a lot of their time looking for things that confirm the thing that they think and ignoring the things that don't. And then they get out there and they go, well, hey, maybe we should get together with a bunch of us who think the same things and enjoy the same activities and doing them in the same way because our people have always done that, and we have churches that look a lot the same. And I kind of call these faith communities like country club churches, right? And it's something that we in the ELCA, the widest denomination in America, need to be pretty aware of. It's a possibility. It's something that we have to keep ourselves honest with, that possibility. But last week, I went down to New Orleans with this group of teens and a couple awesome chaperones and Clay and Debbie back there. And I didn't have that experience. Didn't have that experience at all. Now, I was nervous about it because I don't know but New Orleans is about 60% black. And these 16,000 Lutherans that descended on New Orleans, not nearly that. pretty far close to 100% white. I did the math. That makes New Orleans about 55% black last week. It's about 5% less. That's how much of the city. I mean, we showed up and we took over all these Lutherans. And people who didn't know we were coming were surprised. They did not know what was going on. And we got into the Smoothie King Center, which is it's where the New Orleans Pelicans play basketball. And that's where we did our mass gathering and our closing and opening worships. And we walk into there, it's the arena, it's like our Moda Center. Seats 17,000 people, and we had a little over 16,000. So we are in all the way around the stadium, 360-degree viewing of these mass gatherings and worship, and we are getting up to the top rows in the stadium. The thing was packed. It probably looked something like what it might have felt like for Jesus preaching to 5,000 people on the side of a hill somewhere. It reminded me of that. What was interesting to me was the food that was served at these mass gatherings. The meat of it all were these keynote speakers. And I don't know if it's a miracle, but it didn't come from the places that I necessarily expected. We had, just to name a few, we had a trans teen. We had a non-binary pastor. We had a black woman and famous author, Austin Channing Tatum. You might have read some of her books. We had a deaf pastor who started a completely deaf church. And we had a woman named Reverend Sally Azar. And Sally Azar, for me, was like, it was shaking. She is a pastor from Palestine. In fact, she is the first woman to be ordained in the Holy Land. She's a pastor at the Lutheran Church in the Holy Land. And what she talked about in her sermon was just eye-opening to me, because she talked about the things that growing up as a Palestinian in the Holy Land that she experienced as normal, that she later learned in her life was not normal. She talked about being looked at wearily on a daily basis by soldiers carrying rifles, just as she went about her day. She talked about making sure that when she left for the grocery store, she didn't forget her ID, because it was probably going to be asked for. And she talked about, she said, I thought it was normal that like sometimes soldiers would just break into people's houses in the middle of the night and arrest people for no reason. And she said, these are realities that she grew up with in Palestine, as a Palestinian woman, living under Israeli occupation. And she talked about how her grandparents and their entire generation of Palestinians, a massive swath of them, decades ago left their houses in Palestine, and she said they left them with the front doors locked because they anticipated the day when they would come back. They'd come back home when it was all calmed down, when it was all over, when they were safe again, that they left their front doors locked so they could come back home. And they never did. To this day, they still never have. And she talked about the United States' role in setting up this Jewish state, this Zionist state post-World War II, and treating Palestine as land without a people, when she said, my people were there the whole time. And I was like, as I listened to this, I was like, man, that stinks. That's horrible. And then she showed a picture on the big screen, which I would love to be able to show you right now. But she showed a picture on the big screen of her at the front of her sanctuary, sitting on steps that looked kind of like this, with some children in front of an altar that looked kind of like this. And she was just giving a children's sermon. And I was like, that looks kind of like St. Andrew. And then she invites up on stage at the end of her talk these students that she brought with her, high school students from Palestine, to participate in the gathering. And they waved their flag and everyone cheered. And it was amazing. And as they're up there, I thought, those kind of look like my teens, which I brought here. That changes it. That changes it. It did for me. I don't know, like, I had this thing where I guess it was like a willful ignorance that, like, as long as I don't know too much, or if someone asks me about what's going on over there in Palestine and Gaza and Israel, and I can say, it's really complicated, I'm not the right person. I'm not the right person to answer that question. I don't really know. It's bigger than I am. I don't understand. I don't have a horse in that race or whatever. I had this willing ignorance to not have to participate, not have to get into the messiness of it. And as soon as I saw her sitting on the stairs that looked kind of like these ones, and then standing next to her teens that looked kind of like mine, that wasn't good enough anymore. And it's where this comes, that this understanding of faith as being the thing that confirms us over and over again, that it doesn't seem to do enough for me. It seems like I need something more. I'm reminded of Allison. I had her on the podcast a few months ago, and I'm sure I've talked about this before. But we talked about churches that instead of being like country clubs, would be like gyms. Somewhere where you go to work your muscles, somewhere where you go to push yourself, somewhere you go to get stronger by breaking down what exists so it can build back better. And man, listening to Reverend Sally Azar was like, ooh, that was bench press or something for me. And that was hard work. Because there's something to that. Like, when you humanize other people, everyone, it's hard, you can't confirm everything because we're trained. Our brains are trained not to do that. Our brains have been trained over thousands of years to compartmentalize, to make snap decisions for survival. And it's something that we have to intentionally undo when we meet people and look at them and see their full humanity. And I've come to realize that this is kind of at the center of this question of what is faith? Is faith confirming what we already believe, or is it looking for ways where we can be proven wrong? And when you make everyone a human, as we're called to, the answer of those, I think, starts to become pretty clear. Because here's what I know to be true, is we're called to work towards justice and peace. Peace worldwide, unity in politics, justice for those who have been oppressed. And we can't do any of those things if we don't see the full and the equal humanity of everyone who's involved. Until we get to that point, then the efforts are futile. And getting to that point means we need to realize sometimes when we've been wrong. And it doesn't come at expense of our faith, but it strengthens it. It's hard work, and it's humble work. But it's also required because being wrong and realizing it that's how we bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. It is what faith is. It's knowing that we need to be wrong sometimes because that is how we change and grow. We think about the most central calls of Christianity. We can't feed the hungry until we realize every human needs to eat. We don't visit the imprisoned until we see incarcerated people as fully people. We can't love our enemies until we realize we are as much and as little as they are. And we can't call for peace until we realize that both sides need it just as bad as the other. So, a maybe unexpected benediction for you today. May you be wrong today. May you be wrong today. And I'll be right there with you. Amen.